When people talk about that golden age of gaming, they're often referring to the arcade gaming industry in the late 70s, but I think the real golden age of gaming, especially for first-person shooters, was around the year 2000 and 2001. In those 2 years, we got games like Thief 2, Soldier of Fortune, Perfect Dark, Quake 3, No One Lives Forever, Halo, and I could go on and on. In 2001, we also got Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon, which a lot of people argue is one of the best tactical shooters ever made, and 2001 also saw the release of the Game of the Year edition of SWAT 3, a tactical first-person shooter developed by Sierra Entertainment. It was at the time the latest game in the long-running Police Quest series, what was formerly a point-and-click adventure-style bunch of games originally released in the late 80s. SWAT 3 on the other hand took the series in a new direction, being the first in the series to take a first-person perspective, and I guess also taking a bit of influence from the Rainbow Six games, with the key difference being that in SWAT 3 you're playing as police officers as opposed to soldiers. Now, to be fair, the original SWAT 3 was actually released in 1999, but the superior Game of the Year edition was released in 2001, which mainly includes a bunch of new missions to extend the original campaign. Playing it now in 2017, you're probably wondering, is it still as fun and enjoyable as it was almost 2 decades ago? Well, let's find out.
Like taking candy from baby.
Now, there is an actual story in this game, kind of. The bulk of the missions in the game are centered around a peace treaty being signed by the United Nations, and a bunch of terrorist groups have got their noses out of joint over the whole thing and are wreaking havoc as a result. The player takes the role of the SWAT commander, giving orders to both the red and blue team across 16 different missions. These missions start off simple and easy enough where you've only got to deal with 1 or 2 different hostiles, but later missions put you up against a dozen enemies in much more complex and elaborate environments, and require a fair bit of common sense and patience.
The suspect has been neutralized.
Giving orders to the red or blue squad is a piece of cake. You simply aim your crosshair at whatever you want them to interact with, then quickly select the option from a menu in the upper left of the screen. From getting them to restrain civilians or hostiles to breaching doors with a flashbang, it's all simple, as it bloody well should be. At times it's easy to give them all the same order, having them work as an element as it's called in game, which can make them much more effective, especially when doing something more dangerous like clearing out a room. It's always easy to get them to do what you need, and I'd say like 90% of the time they do it swiftly and without any fuss, which for a game released in 1999 and 2001, around the same time as the infamous Daikatana, is pretty impressive. SWAT 3 does kind of play like a watered down version of the earlier Rainbow Six games with similar missions, albeit in a much different setting, but structured the same way, really forcing the player into taking your time, checking every corner, and having to really know the area you're heading into and what it is you're supposed to be doing. It doesn't actually feel like a traditional first-person shooter, mostly because there's no weapon models, which I think is more done as a way to improve visibility during gameplay than anything else. At the start of each mission, you're given this very detailed chunk of information which tells you everything you need to know, like the enemies you're coming up against and the weapons they're using, even what they look like sometimes. And certain missions also give you the option to choose your entrance point. Despite what the ultimate objective is for each mission, all you're really doing is searching an entire area and either arresting or killing the hostiles, as well as rescuing any civilians that happen to be caught in the crossfire. However, there's more to it than just running around and shooting things. First off, you can switch between what's called a stealth mode and a dynamic mode. Dynamic mode just basically means the AI is going to shoot the enemies on sight, whereas stealth mode takes things a bit more cautiously. And then on top of that, being in either of these modes also changes the orders you're able to give each team. There is a bit of a focus on arresting suspects as opposed to just shooting them on sight.
Dirty bastards.
You can try to make them comply by dropping their weapon and getting on their knees and handcuffing them, which is fine if you're a pacifist, but doing this to a dozen bad guys in a single mission is just kinda tedious, and it's often easier to just gun them down.
Suspect down.
Even before you can rescue civilians, you've still got to handcuff them as well, so handcuffing everyone you come across just seems like extra work. It can take a bit of time to get used to the controls and whatnot, but once everything clicks, it becomes a hell of a lot of fun and you'll be breaching doors and rescuing hostages in no time. Part of what makes SWAT 3 have such a high replayability factor is its RNG aspect, where every single time you replay a mission, every single time, enemies and civilians are going to be in entirely different locations. Now, this doesn't matter so much for civilians, but can have a huge effect on the game if enemies are placed into trickier spots, like stairwells for instance, or anything that's above the player.
Look, man, there's
Most of the time, your squad can take the bad guys out pretty easily. They're hands down faster reacting than the player is ever going to be, so sending them into rooms before you is definitely the way to go. But you can still get a crappy enemy placement, and it's lights out for one of your squad mates. Now, I can appreciate this aspect of the gameplay, but it does kind of throw a bit of a spanner into the works, and it makes it so frustrating when you've played a mission down to the letter, and then some asshole has been placed in the corner of a room you've just entered and manages to gun you down before you're able to finish.
Copy. Let's go. We're all with you.
You're given a little gadget to see around corners, and of course you're always able to throw a flashbang into any room you've not yet entered to improve your chances of survival, but even then you often just get really unlucky, or have that momentary lapse of concentration and it's all over. Maybe that was kind of the point though. I mean, it's not really the kind of game that you should be mashing the quick save button every 5 seconds anyway. SWAT 3 does give the player a health bar, though for what purpose I'm not quite entirely sure, as you quite literally die almost instantly if you're under fire from an enemy, especially if they're at close or medium range. You can fiddle around with the reaction times for the enemies and also lower the difficulty if it becomes too much to handle, but I honestly found no real difference between these difficulty modes. This is a realistic game in the sense that you're not going to be able to survive a whole magazine from an AK-47, nor patch yourself up with a little box with a red cross on it. But it can at times seem a bit unfair when you're killed, as I said too, making it even more annoying if it happens towards the end of a mission you've just spent upwards of 10 minutes on. Having said that though, part of what makes the game so much fun for certain people is replaying missions over and over and having everything pan out flawlessly. When you finally complete a tough mission with all your squad alive and intact, it feels really satisfying. How does the whole thing run, you're probably wondering too? Well, all things considered, pretty damn good. The game doesn't support high resolutions or anything like that. In fact, I think the highest it goes is 1280 by 1024, and it weirdly changes to 800 by 600 when you're in the main menu, but it also seems to be pretty stable across the board, again something that's impressive considering the game's age. Sound and music are kind of basic, not that it really matters all that much though, and you hear the same 4 or 5 lines of dialogue probably 50 times per mission, but again you can't really knock that considering the age of the game. Outside of the career mode, which is the closest thing to a campaign, there's the option to play a bunch of other missions in any order you want, as long as you're playing the Game of the Year edition, which I'm pretty sure is the only edition you can even get anymore. As an alternative to all the meticulous planning and shit you have to do in some of the Rainbow Six games, SWAT 3 does offer up an alternative approach to the tactical shooting genre, without coming across as casual or dumbed down, and also still being challenging as all hell. I would have liked to see a few more weapons to play around with and maybe a bit more customization with the guys in your squad, but overall there's really not all that much stuff to complain about, and I'm really trying to rack my brain in terms of negative points to bring up. I guess it is kind of annoying how you have to handcuff, report, and evacuate every single hostage or civilian you come across, but otherwise there's not really anything fundamentally wrong with it. You're not going to be kicking down doors and shooting Nazis like in Return to Castle Wolfenstein, you're not going to be blowing chunks out of terrorists like in Soldier of Fortune, and you're not going to be staring at Kate Archer's ass as if you're playing No One Lives Forever, but for what it is, SWAT 3 offers up a lot of fun. It's on Good Old Games for about $10, so check it out.
Dirty bastards.